Good evening, barflies and lounge lizards, and welcome to the Atomic Snack Bar. On this week's episode, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite biographies and autobiographies with some connection to classic sci-fi. Now, this won't be a ranking, and the entries aren't really in any kind of order. Well, other than the top secret order, I'm not legally allowed to discuss. Forrest Tucker-related reasons and all. And if you're playing the snack bar drinking game, you're going to be plastered by the time this one's over. And number 5 is Confessions of a Puppet Master by Charles Band and Adam Felber. First published in 2021, this is the story of filmmaker and genre film legend Charles Band of the great Empire Pictures and Full Moon Features. And though he's probably most associated with horror, Band has an incredible sci-fi resume as well as credits on some of my all-time favorite movies including The Dungeon Master, Eliminators, Metal Storm, and Trancers. This book covers his entire career and touches on many of the films mentioned. This is also probably the most entertaining book on this list. Let me tell you, that Charles Band was a character, and he is not afraid to tell stories that don't always paint him in the best light. From getting taken advantage of, to the fall of empire, to an affair with Demi Moore, and a very amusing story involving his wife and mistress, this book pulls no punches. But it's done in a humorous, honest, positive, and charming way. Band seems to have the same self-deprecating cockiness that I do. A real highlight of the book is the section about the making of Troll from 1986, and the stories about one of my all-time favorite actors, Phil Fondacaro. And of course, there's some talk of Tim Thomerson. The book itself is a good size, coming in at 288 pages with well-done formatting, and like many of its kind, it features a section of color photos in the center. I like those, of course, but I do always prefer lots of black and white photos scattered throughout the book. A big thanks to Max for leaving this one at the snack bar. And number 4, Paul Blaisdell, Monster Maker, by Randy Palmer. First published, I believe, in 1997. Monster Maker is the biography of the great Paul Blaisdell. Now, I'm sure pretty much all of you watching this know exactly who Paul was, but just in case, he was one of the greatest movie monster makers of all time. Not only were his monsters absolutely wonderful looking and iconic, most were done on minuscule budgets, and just a few of those include the Venusian from It Conquered the World, the Saucerman from Invasion of the Saucermen, and the She-Creature from The She-Creature. Much of the information in the book came from Blaisdell himself, from correspondence between him and the author Randy Palmer between the years 1971 and 1982, just a year before Blaisdell's very untimely passing. And the information not from Paul came from his wife and the also great Bob Burns. More on him in a bit. But this is really a great book for fans of 50s sci-fi. Interestingly, a factoid I didn't know was that Paul started out as an artist, doing sci-fi illustrations and paintings for pulp magazines and comics. The book comes in at close to 300 pages and has a decent amount of black and white photos throughout. I've actually used this one for research here on the channel. And a big thanks to Mr. Tony Santiago for throwing this one through the window of the snack bar. And number 3 on the list is Ed Wood, Nightmare of Ecstasy by Rudolph Martin. First published in 1992, Nightmare of Ecstasy is the story of one of film's most unfairly criticized filmmakers and the basis of the 1994 Tim Burton film Ed Wood. And regardless of how you feel about Ed, this book certainly deserves its place on the list, being that he directed one of the most infamous sci-fi films of all time, Plan 9 from Outer Space. And this is a fascinating book with a really unique style, and it's that style that had me hold off from reading it for way too long. But Wood was dead long before, I assume, work began on the book, and there wasn't exactly a lot of information floating around out there. So Martin went and did a series of interviews with the people that knew Ed best. Hearing that, I initially thought, a series of interviews? That sounds like a tedious read. Quite the contrary. Martin cut said interviews up, putting the appropriate and relative parts together, forming an actual narrative, really creative and well done. And even when two accounts would contradict each other, Martin would leave these, always for different perspectives. Now I will say, this one doesn't have the upbeat ending that the film had. Things ended pretty badly for Ed, and also unlike in the film, Kathy O'Hara, who was played by Patricia Arquette, was certainly not the saint the movie portrayed her as. Whereas on the other hand, future Elvis songwriter Dolores Fuller was far from the villain the movie made her out to be. In fact, Fuller attempted to contact Sarah Jessica Parker about the role, and Parker would have nothing to do with her. Nightmare of Ecstasy comes in at 231 pages and features a nice amount of black and white images. And with that, we should take a commercial break.
How would you explain this? A dozen people around the world who never met each other describe an encounter with a being from space, and their descriptions of the creature match almost exactly. And how do you explain this? A man's heart stops beating in a hospital, and he sees a blinding light that doesn't frighten him, but fills him with an indescribable feeling of peace. And how can you explain the growing number of people who feel that they've had a brush with something beyond our everyday understanding? Maybe no one can fully explain these things, but they can no longer be ignored. That's why Time Life takes a serious look into this world with a remarkable new series, Mysteries of the Unknown, to provide an objective and comprehensive look at what may lie beyond our ordinary reality. There are so many hints of a world more remarkable than we ever imagined, and of abilities that we barely suspect. Send for your first volume on a free trial basis and see if you can explain these things away.
To order your first book, Mystic Places, call 1-800-548-4600. Examine it for 10 days. Keep it and pay just $12.99 plus shipping and handling.
And we're back with number 2 on the list, and that's True Indie, Life and Death in Filmmaking by Don Coscarelli. And I know, Don Coscarelli probably isn't a name that immediately jumps to mind when one thinks sci-fi, but he did Bubba Hotep, John Dies at the End, and the later Phantasm films, which got extremely sci-fi as they went. Ravager, bad CG aside, is the second best film in the series in my exceptionally humble opinion. And we can't forget The Beastmaster, one of the strongest sword and sorcery films of the 80s. And being that Coscarelli has a relatively small filmography, there's quite a bit of detail here on many of his films. It's a really well-written book and quite entertaining. His Memories of Angus Scrimm alone is worth the price of admission. So let's address the painted elephant in the room. Many folks take issue with Coscarelli and Beastmaster, claiming he killed a tiger by painting it black. And though oddly he does not address this in the book, this is not the case at all. From my understanding, and I've read up on this a good bit, what happened was, in order to dye the fur of tigers, they have to be sedated. But often, the tigers just don't wake up, and that's exactly what happened. Coscarelli felt terrible, of course, but I don't think he had any idea any of it was even going on. And there was a couple of different tigers used as well, so the one you see on screen more than likely is not even the one that died. True Indie comes in at 352 pages and is very light on images, but it does have a few color shots in the middle. And now it's time for an honorable mention, and that's A Youth in Babylon, Confessions of a Trash Film King by exploitation film legend David Friedman. Friedman doesn't really have any connection to classic sci-fi, but as I mentioned in my She-Freak retrospective, his CO in World War II was Forrest Tucker. And number 1 on the list is Bob Burns' Monster Kid Memories by Bob Burns and Tom Weaver. First published in 2013, Monster Kid Memories tells the story, sorta, of the greatest unsung hero of classic sci-fi the world has ever known, actor, producer, historian, and collector Bob Burns. Bob is single-handedly responsible for saving a vast number of sci-fi props. Now, the reason I said this was his story, sorta, was because it isn't your traditional autobiography. It's not Bob's story, per se, but his history with and memories of different notable names in classic sci-fi, including Paul Blaisdell, Charles Gamora, George Powell, and a particularly touching section on Glenn Strange. That is, if you have those pesky human-type emotions. I sold mine on eBay. And remember when I said that this top list wasn't really in any kind of order? Well, that was complete nonsense because this is my highest recommendation here. If you like classic sci-fi, this book is a must-have. It's very well written and a real page-turner. Bob is just such a likable and wonderful guy, and insanely knowledgeable. If you've ever heard one of his DVD or Blu-ray commentaries, they are some of the best you will ever run across. I've used this very tome as well for channel research. This book is quite awesomely laid out as well. It comes in at 228 pages and is about the size of half a phone book. It's also slam full of amazing photographs. Nearly every page has at least one, often more. And that's all the time we have for this week. Please like, comment, subscribe, go out and buy all these books, watch the skies, and stay atomic.
You can find them all in the home of film fan, creature creator, and monster movie historian, Bob Burns.